You're watching The Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.
That stadium is going to be rocking, and heaven help whoever walks in there to play us.
Sustained effort and violence, you play your ass off.
You're watching the Pirate Preview on The Sports Objective. Join us every Tuesday night on YouTube Live as we're joined by beat writers and other media members as we take a look at what lies ahead for the Pirates. Now, here are the guys.
It is a first down. Pirates.
It is game day. The Pirates are out in Provo preparing to take on the BYU Cougars. 8 o'clock Eastern time, 6 o'clock Mountain time there at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. And this edition of the show on the Pirate Preview, if you will, and a little bit of just extra interview this week. Catching up with guys that we've had on the program before. Covers BYU for 24/7 Sports as well as the Give 'Em Hell podcast. Welcome back to the show, Garrett McClintock. Garrett, we appreciate your time.
No worries. It's always a good time when I get to chat with y'all.
No doubt. And, a very rare matchup between the Pirates and Cougars, just the third meeting in school history for these two programs. And so, when you take a look at this matchup, what are your thoughts on Mike Houston's ball club?
Well, Mike Houston, I think it's finally you guys are coming into your own, right? Because obviously he was the coach at JMU before. This is year 4 for him now. And so as the first couple of years were a little dicey, but he got Holton Ahlers in there in that first class and started him as a freshman. And so it's kind of been, I've, semi-followed your guys' ball club for the last few years, and it's been fun to see that growth and the progression. I think it's regardless of record and regardless of different, rankings and things, it's just, this isn't a matchup that I think fares well for the Cougars. I mean, you guys have an experienced quarterback who is, his 4th year as a starter, and you guys have a great passing offense. And our defense is right now is just in shambles. There have been some internal shakeups on our staff where it appears that they're kind of riding out the season with some shuffled responsibilities, and we're likely going to see an overhaul of the entire defensive staff in the offseason. And so that is something, that is, it can be kind of demoralizing, right? Because it's how is the big question tonight for BYU fans everywhere is how is the team going to respond, right? Is it, after getting whooped last week, lost, I think the final score was 41-14 against Liberty. At one point at the end of the first quarter, we were up 14-3 and then ended up losing 41-14. So it's like both sides of the ball right now out of sync. And it's kind of who's going to step up and be a leader and be that guy. And are we going to get the, in a lot of ways, this feels like a make or break point for the season, because obviously the last 2 weeks were far from ideal. And is it going to be, but it's still at the same time, turning the ship around and finishing 9-4 is still very much on the table. And I don't think anyone could complain and say, that like a 9-4 season was a major disappointment. So for us, it really feels like are we scoring aside is like, how are we going to see on the effort? Because last week we saw a team that really just in the middle of the third quarter just quit. And you could tell the guys didn't want to be there. Like they were checked out, frustrated. I think most fans would probably say they didn't feel like the team was frustrated enough, right? Because you see those games where they're losing, but you can tell the intensity and the effort is still there, and they're just kind of grasping at anything that works versus just kind of going through the motions. And so I think that's the biggest thing, to where even I was surprised that the line opened up the way it did with the Cougars as a 3-point favorite given everything that's going around. But I mean, you guys are having to play late. Coming back to time zones, that can be a bit of a factor. The altitude can be a factor. The weather, I haven't looked to see the weather, what it's supposed to be at kickoff tonight. Let's see, right around 6. It's supposed to be 53 degrees and stay in basically be 53 degrees and then drop into the 40s. It could be in the high 30s by the time the game ends. So I think the weather could be a factor here in the altitude. But I think it's a really good matchup for you guys, and Holton. I would be shocked if Holton Ahlers doesn't have a big game tonight.
You talk about the defensive struggles. so many expectations coming into the season for BYU, and rightfully so. So many solid, so much solid talent. I should say, on this team, and taking a look at it at the beginning of the season, it was seemingly playing out that way. Rose to number 12 in the nation, and then you had the game up at Oregon, which I think the Cougars were an underdog in that game, but I was a little surprised that it played out the way in which it did. But
same.
If you would elaborate on those defensive struggles, because I know in the last 3 games specifically, you're allowing something like 270 or 275 rushing yards per game.
Yeah, it's been bad. We've surely struggled since week 2. The Baylor game, we kind of clamped down, and Baylor averaged like 2.5 yards a carry, but then the wheels have just kind of slowly completely come off. And where it's that Oregon game, we were like a 5 or 6 point dog on the road there, which was fine, but it's definitely didn't, losing is one thing, but getting whooped is a whole different story, right? And so it was just the lack of bounce back. But even the 2 weeks after that, it was kind of, there's not really been a whole lot of confidence for the last month and a half, because even the 2 weeks after Oregon, it's like we played Wyoming at home, then we played Utah State at home the week after that, and both of those games felt really clunky, and it just wasn't. It felt like the first half was way too close. Like we played with our food, and then came out in the second half and played more the way we should have. And so the final score ended up being a decent margin of kind of what you would expect, but it wasn't. And then since, the last 3 weeks, like the offense started looking dysfunctional really against Notre Dame. And we saw Jaron Hall, he's been hurt. Like he partially, separated his shoulder against Utah State. And then he was the first half against Notre Dame. He was just, frankly, it was awful. It was the worst half of his career. And he just wasn't, I don't know if it was just, it was hurting him before it wasn't that, or if he was, on some painkillers that he just was not seeing the field well at all. And that kind of bled over into the next 2 weeks where, especially running the ball, we can't get a stop really to save our lives. And so going into last week, after the Arkansas game 2 weeks ago, there were some tough conversations. And then going into last week, it was, there were rumors throughout the week. And then after the game on Saturday, it was made, public in his post-game press conference that head coach Kalani Sitake had taken over play calling on the defense and really trying to get the ship righted, because it seemed like there was not a lot of buy-in, which is always, it doesn't matter in terms of talent. And you played sports growing up, right? In college, like in terms of talent and scheme, I think scheme is the least important of, because, there's only so much you can do with the talent that you have, and you can kind of scheme around some of it. But if you don't have the horses, you don't have the horses. And so there is a talent issue on our defense, but the biggest thing is there's a real lack of leadership. And so that's where we're wanting to see something of kind of who's going to step up and be the guy and say no, we're not going to let this season go down the drain, and step up. And that's been probably the biggest issue, and kind of what, from a fan perspective and maybe from a player perspective too, just being in the struggle, being an independent, which I know you guys were you guys were an independent forever, basically, until you joined Conference USA in the 90s, right?
Right. From the late 70s up to 1997, so 78 to 97. So essentially, 2 decades as an independent.
Right. But in that era though, there were all of Conference A and all Conference USA and all of the Big East were formed by 20 some odd independents saying, okay, we got to get in the league together and kind of banded together. But it was, it's kind of, now it goes for, after that Oregon loss, we're sitting in number 12 going into Autzen, and it's okay, if we beat Oregon, and there was buzz of okay, well, if we beat Oregon, then that probably proves that they're legit. And it wasn't just, BYU fans with the blue goggles on living the pipe dream, even national podcasts listened on Cover 3 or the College Football Inquirer, things like that you're saying is this a dark horse candidate? Because if we ran the table, that would include wins over Oregon, Baylor, Notre Dame, Arkansas. That's a pretty good record. Now you're looking at potentially an NY6, all this stuff. And I think they kind of bought into it. I don't know if players bought into it or got ahead of themselves, whatever. But then it's kind of, once that first loss hits as an independent today in college football, and then in college football, it's like, okay, well, now we're not going to the New Year's Six. There's not a conference championship to play for. And no matter what happens, we know it's like we're going to go to a lower end bowl, because we don't have those tiered bowl agreements that a conference benefits you. And so we got to play Baylor, Oregon, Arkansas, and Notre Dame all in the same, and Stanford all in the same season. And that's an awesome season, but it kind of seems like there's no payoff at the end of the season, right? Whereas even, if you start off 0-4 in your non-conference play, you can still go in and look at the American and say, okay, well, if we win our next 8 games, like we can still be playing for a conference championship. And there's still something on the table. And it was obviously different in the 70s and 80s when there were only like 10 bowl games. And so most teams were not going to a bowl. So it didn't really matter. That was kind of not a major factor in your psyche and outlook on the season. But it's kind of has felt like, who's going to be that guy and who's going to step up and see, like, are we going to see somebody getting after it? And there is some kind of vibes that, there was, the words out of practice this week was that there were some, against Arkansas, it was heated from coaches in the locker room after the game, but then it kind of seemed like after last week, the more the conversation was that it was heated from the players. And that's as a former coach, right, that it's when the players take ownership of what's happening on the field, that's really the only way you can turn a season around or kind of get things going around. So there's maybe some hope around that, get a bounce back game just being at home. We always play better at night just because, not all in the recent years, last decade, because being an independent, we've had our own TV contract. We usually end up being that 8 p.m. kickoff. We have a lot of games that are kicking off at, 10, 11 Eastern. And so usually in night games, especially at home, we play much better. I think we've won our last 19 or 20 home games that have kicked off at night, but then we've lost. We're like in our last 10 games that have kicked off before 5 p.m. We're like 1-9. So we definitely there is that rhythm and the routine of, when we kick off late after dinner and then, go back to the hotel and go to bed, is like, that is kind of the routine. And so there's maybe some hope that it's, a second week of practice with Kalani over the defense himself in taking over that play calling, and maybe had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment for some of the leaders on the team and to kind of step up, that maybe we see a bounce back game. But really, we just want to see the defense, flying around and being a lot more aggressive than what they have been. Cause a lot of it, it hasn't been necessarily that guys weren't in position. It's just kind of slow to make plays. Like you see in the backers being flat footed, guys that are in position to make a play, but don't really go for it. So it's just kind of not quite in the right spot where it's just like something is not clicking on the defense. And then the offense, we've really struggled running the ball. And part of that obviously is just defensively. When we're giving up long drives offense, or, like last week, it was 14-3. And then I think they gave up a field goal or kicked up a field goal. And then it was, they scored a touchdown, and then came back and it was 17-14. And then it went to, got to that middle 8 of the game where we turned the ball over on downs. They scored. And then we got the ball, had a drive stall out to start the third quarter. And then they immediately scored again. And so now it went from 17-14 to whatever, 31-14, and really quick. And then now it's offensively, your entire script for the entire second half of the game has to flip. And defensively, when we couldn't get off the field, we've really struggled running the ball. And there were some comments from our offensive coordinator, Aaron Roderick, this week that a lot of it has just come from really feeling like, finding what is working in the run game and really having a chance to get the run game going, because there's been that pressure of, well, we've got to score points. Like we have to score points and score fast because, and so it's just kind of, we're not playing complementary football in all 3 phases. And so that's really, I think what we want to see is just offensively. I think we'd like to see a complete game. Jaron Hall hasn't played great the last couple of weeks, so his arm should be fully healed now. See him back to his usual form, which is very good, like NFL prospect caliber good. And I would love to see a great QB battle between him and Ehlers. That would be awesome. A very fun and exciting game. And then defensively, kind of just see who's going to step up and be the leader and be the guy that's like out there rallying the troops and just flying around making plays. Because that's kind of that tenacity and that excitement that you see is just really been missing on the defensive side of the ball.
kind of a natural transition to my next question or point, and that is, some of the injuries that BYU has and things that we've seen reported this week. Wanted to mention those. Waylon Summerlin chimes in on Facebook saying, "Are there any notable injuries from players who were on the original starting lineup?" And correct me if I'm wrong, Garrett, but I've seen that top receiver freshman Cody Epps, 39 catches, 460 yards, 6 touchdowns, as well as top running back Christopher Brooks, who has just shy of 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, and will be missing the game with an injury. Is that right?
Yeah, Brooks went out with a hamstring injury in the second quarter of the game last week. So there was kind of, I mentioned, the running game had struggled getting going all season. So he'd kind of been rotating through 3 backs of Chris Brooks and then also Lopini Katoa, who's a senior, who's been around for a long time, and then Miles Davis, who is a redshirt freshman, I believe. And so I don't remember his actual, with all the COVID years, it's kind of hard to keep track. And so we can rotating through those, and Davis, it looked like he was going to kind of emerge to be that bell cow back. And then he got hurt and missed a couple weeks. And then kind of Brooks kind of took the lead. And so Brooks had been solidifying himself as that number 1 guy and getting the most run. So there still are backs available, but missing Brooks as the 230-pound banger that's going to be able to push a pile forward is definitely a big loss. He went out in the second quarter with a hamstring injury last week. And then Cody Epps, he went down. He took a big hit in the third or fourth quarter of the game last week, and he it looks like that may be season ending or maybe back for the bowl game. I think it may be a broken wrist or something along those lines. So which is really unfortunate. He has been a very huge bright spot. We've had a ton of injuries in the receiving corps. So obviously Puka Nacua is our best receiver, in NFL talent, was a 5-star kid out of high school, went to Washington, then transferred back with his brother last year. He was our leading receiver last year. He got hurt in the first game of the season, and he's been back. I think last week was only the 3rd game that he's played in because of those injuries. Gunnar Romney, who is a senior, who's been here since 2018. And also, he's struggled with injuries most of his career, but he took a hit in fall camp and lacerated his kidney. And so he missed the first 6 games, or 5 games because of that. And so him getting back into it. And then he played against Utah State and Notre Dame, but then he got hit again against Notre Dame and had to spend the night in the hospital in Vegas to make sure everything was okay with that. And so he's been out. And then Chase Roberts really emerged as the star against Baylor, had over 200 receiving yards and looked great, but then he got hurt against Oregon and missed a month. And so last week was his first game back. So it's just kind of been a revolving door at receiver. And to Fesi Satake, who is so Kalani Satake's first cousin, is our receivers coach. And to Fesi's credit, the receivers have all been prepared and have all played really, really well, even though we're, at the start of the year, Cody Epps was like, you would say he's like 6th on the depth chart, but he's really taken over and solidified himself as being a very, very reliable wide receiver 1. And so that will be a big loss tonight that we need to repair. So the receivers that we'll see will be Puka Nacua, Chase Roberts is healthy, and then Braden Cosper. And then obviously, of course, Isaac Rex is our returning tight end who will be a big target. He's like 6'6", and so he'll be a big target down in the red zone.
Yeah, you mentioned Nacua, the Washington transfer in the last 2 weeks, and you were correct, and he did return against Notre Dame. I don't think he caught a ball against the Fighting Irish, but in the last two games, he's caught 15 passes for 255 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Pirate fans definitely keep an eye on Puka Nacua.
Yep. And he's also had 10 carries for another. He's had 10 carries in the last 2 games as well. So they started even pulling him into motioning him, like pulling him into the backfield and using him not just on the fly sweep, but actually there's been a couple packages where he's just lining straight up at running back.
Kind of a wildcat look.
Yep.
All right. And correct me if I'm wrong. Did you mention Keanu Hill?
Oh yeah. Keanu Hill. Yeah. I totally forgot. Yeah. Keanu Hill will be in there. He'll probably the primary 3 will be Roberts. It'll be Nacua and Roberts on the outside and Hill in the slot. And then Cosper's game is pretty similar to Hill, but yeah, Keanu Hill actually early in the season when he was the leading receiver, he had a couple big games, and then he's kind of faded the last couple of weeks. So it's just the pass distribution has been pretty even across like 7 receivers now this far into the season.
Obviously, one of the things that stands out about East Carolina offensively, you talk about Holton Ahlers in the passing game the last 2 weeks. 56 out of 70, 80% of his passes have been completed and for a little over 600 yards, no interceptions, and top targets, obviously, Isaiah Winstead and C.J. Johnson, 2 very large wide receivers, and that's something that stood out to me about Hill, 6'4", 215, and he has 22 receptions, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, Hill is his uncle played at Oklahoma and played in the NFL and so he was a very much under the rated prospect. He played at Euless Trinity High School in the Dallas area, which is it's a very Polynesian heavy area of Dallas, and so they basically run an old school like power I offense, and he had like 15 catches his senior year of high school and was their leading receiver type of offense. And so, but he had NFL bloodlines and came in, and he's been here in the program for 3-4 years now and has slowly developed, but has become a very reliable target.
Now, you talked about the defensive struggles at large, but tell us about some of the defensive personnel. I know Max Tooley and Ben Bywater, what they have right around 50 tackles apiece and have combined for 5 interceptions. Both of them are linebackers. So talk about those guys.
Yeah, so Max Tooley at the beginning of the year was kind of the star of the defense, and it kind of the first couple games of the season, it looked like, okay, he's going to be like our next defensive superstar that just kind of takes over games, and he's kind of struggled the last few games. Bywater is very talented. He can cover a lot of space, but he struggles with kind of playing contained to where he kind of seems like he will kind of go rogue, or he will be the guy that goes too hard to try to make a play, but then may leave something open behind him. But he is generally he's a pretty sound tackler. And so he's, which makes sense. Like he was a dual sport athlete in high school playing rugby as well. So he's a good open field tackler. But he can really struggle in pass coverage. And so those are the 2 primary backers. Peyton Wilgar was a 4th-year starter at middle linebacker, and he also is hurt. It's a TBD how long he's going to be out. I don't expect him to play tonight. And then Logan's younger brother, Keenan Peely, in there. So the 3 linebackers you're going to see the most of are Tooley, Bywater, and Peely. And on the defensive front, the best defensive lineman is number 92, Tyler Batty. He's really come on to the scene as a very consistent defensive lineman, but we kind of the defensive staff that is looking to be overhauled, they were very much they utilized a hockey style subbing. So there was one point again in the Arkansas game that even a lot of national commentators mentioned that there were, they subbed out all 11 guys on defense. And so it's kind of a revolving door a lot of times, which can make it a struggle for them to get in a rhythm and really feel like they're comfortable just because they're not getting the reps that they need. But you will see the defensive front. You'll mostly see Caden Hawes at the nose and Tyler Batty at the end, and then kind of rotating more through the other guys. And then on the back end, it's safety. Our corners are generally very good. A lot of people feel that this is the best corner group that we've had, really the deepest in program history. We've got Gabe Judulali, who's a transfer who started at Vanderbilt. Caleb Hayes started at Oregon State and transferred in. And then we've also got Jacob Robinson, who started at Utah State as a true freshman and then transferred down as well. And then D'Angelo Mandel has been in the program since 2018, and he's been a multi-year starter. So we're solid 2 deep at the corner position. But our biggest issue defensively has definitely been in the front 7 in stopping the run, and then just in generating pressure on the quarterback and getting rushed. So it's the biggest struggles are definitely on the defensive line is the weak spot of that defensive unit, which is, why we've seen where don't be surprised if it feels like Ahlers has a long time to throw, or if you guys, your running backs like Keaton Mitchell gets going early and often. And I know he's having a great season as well. He's actually on my college fantasy team. But I won't be surprised to see that as well. And especially running the ball, if it's, for you guys, just given the defensive matchup, and then with the altitude or the weather, it can be kind of hard if Ahlers not used to throwing in that condition. You don't want him to force anything, or if he's, there's a long drive when he's coming off the sideline and he's cold, you don't want him to be doing that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of a ground attack from you guys and just try to, ground it out and get out with the W.
Now, before we shift over and talk a little about the special teams aspect, Coach Mike Houston in his weekly press conference on Monday was saying he was very impressed with the offensive tackles for the Cougars. He said just the size across the board, but he was really emphasizing the tackles. And so talk about how they've been able to protect Jaron Hall, and then because of East Carolina, the pass rush has steadily improved over the last 3 or 4 games. I think it's in the last 3 games the Pirates have generated 13 sacks.
Yeah. So at the bookend tackles that we have, well, really across the board, our offensive line is big. We got some big boys down there. So it's in pass protection, kind of just even offensively. If we look at in pass blocking on PFF, we're the number 1 rated team in the country in pass blocking on our offensive line, but our run blocking has really struggled to where we're like in the mid 50s in rush blocking according to PFF grades. But our bookend bookend offensive tackles are Blake Freeland at the left tackle, who's 6'8", and I don't know what he's listed at now, 320 maybe. And he actually played quarterback in high school as a sophomore, committed as a quarterback, and then he grew into where his senior year, when it was clear he wasn't going to play quarterback at the next level. He, switched and transitioned, started playing tight end, and then we moved him to tackle. So he's been starting since 2019. He's took over midseason and his first ever as a true freshman against Boise State, made his first career start, and has been a mainstay there. And so he got moved to the left side last year, and he's leading the country. I think he has the highest pass block grade in the country for any tackle on PFF. And then on the right side, we've got Kingsley Suamataia, who was a 5-star prospect out of high school, who's bookending that other side. So our tackles are very good. And then the interior, there is you got Harris LaChance, who started at right tackle last year, and then when Kingsley transferred in from Oregon, slid him inside to guard. He's also 6'7". And then we've got Clark Barrington on the left side at the left guard, and he is another big body. He's like 6'5", 320, and this is his 3rd year starting as well. He became a starter in 2020. So there was a change made at center 2 weeks ago, heading into the Arkansas game, and that has been something that has been a bit of an issue. We had Joe Tukuwafu took over at center, and he's been a spot player, he's been a spot starter the last couple seasons at both center and guard, and kind of been the utility 6-man on the offensive line. And he kind of took over as a starting center. They made a change to try to get the run game going a couple weeks ago, and there's been 4 missed bat snaps or missed exchanges in the last 2 games. And so there's that is something to keep an eye on, is something that we'll see if your guys' defensive line can get after it and kind of cause some problems there. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten a word exactly whether they're going back to Connor Pay, who was the previous starter, or continued with Tukuwafu there as at the center position. But the offensive line is big. All of them are over 300 pounds. The shortest of the rotation is 6'5". And it's the staff. They don't like to rotate any bodies there. So it's the last 2 games we've seen, the starting 5 pending injury is going to get 100% of the snaps and kind of enroll with that.
Finally, tell us about the Cougars special teams. I saw the net punting average is nearly 41 yards, which is very good. But I saw very much like East Carolina, although with the Pirates it's been more PATs than it has been field goals. But I saw BYU is just 5 out of 10. Yeah.
So the Ryan Rico, the punter, he's got a boot, so he can, he's had a little bit of a down year, a little bit of a regression. I mean, last year he averaged 48 or almost 49 yards a punt, and then he's kind of regressed a little bit. But obviously, with punting, a lot of that is field position, and how much room do you actually have to work with punting. And so, and then on field goals, we've kind of gotten to the point where we've really struggled with the field goals. We had Jake Oldroyd was our kind of money kicker. He was a Groza Award finalist in 2020, was like 13 of 13 on field goals that year. And then this year. He missed a field goal at as time expired in the Baylor game that would have won it. And then in the first overtime, he missed another field goal that would have won it. And then he's just really struggled since then. And so they kind of pulled him, tried a different kicker, tried his backup, and now after there've been some struggles with both of them, it's really anything mid-range. We're sitting at 5 and 10 on field goals, because really anything inside the 40 or inside the 40, really, the 45, they're just going for it. And so we've, like last week, we went for it on 4th and 9 early in the game, because it was at the very edge of, where it would have been like a 52-yard field goal, and just the trust wasn't there in the kickers. And so making that assessment of what do you feel like you can do in that trade-off of where do you think you can go with the drive. And so we went for it on 4th and 9. Didn't work out, unfortunately. But the kicking early has become a non-factor for the team this year. Just like you just said, they're 5 of 10 on field goals total, and there's probably been another 5 or 6 drives that ended in field goal range where there was no attempt because of that lack of trust. So maybe we'll see a close game. The defense will hold you guys running the ball. It'll come down to a game-winning field goal. We'll make the field goal and break all of our curses.
Yeah, I'm sure both coaching staffs, obviously, they're not going to say this publicly, but I'm sure both are, obviously do not want this game to come down to a kick for a variety of reasons, in addition to just, wanting to have the game in hand by that point, but even more so with the way their PAT field goal teams have struggled. And so, before we let you go, Garrett, as always, we appreciate your time, but tell Pirate fans or any Cougars who may be tuned in, obviously, where they can read your work and, listen to your podcast.
Yeah, so you can find us anywhere where podcasts are found. It's Give 'em Hell Brigham is the name of our podcast, and giveemhellbrigham.com. You can come find us. We did decide that, we're being a little superstitious, and since it's such an early game tonight with the 6:00 Mountain kickoff, that we were not going to do a preview because we've been losing as we've done previews. So we're just going to wait and do a post-game show and either be very happy that we turned things around or just give pure unfiltered ranting at midnight whenever the game is over. So yeah, you can find us anywhere. My Twitter handle is GJ McClintock, or just follow us at Give 'em Hell Pod. So thanks again for having me on, Bubba.
No doubt. Always enjoy the visit. It should be a interesting game. A lot of unique, variables and intangibles. With the Pirates traveling 2 time zones and the weather, obviously, that we discussed. But we appreciate everyone tuning in for this Pirate Preview Extra. And join us tonight at halftime. We'll join you here on YouTube as well as Facebook Live for 10 to 15 minutes to give you our thoughts on the first half, something a little new this week. And obviously on Sunday, we'll have our Pirate football playback around 7 or 8 o'clock, on YouTube, Facebook Live, and then pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, you can find us. But for Garrett McClintock from BYU 24/7 Sports, I'm Bubba Rosenbaum. You've been watching and listening to The Sports Objective. Have a great weekend, everyone. And as always, go Pirates.
You've been watching the Pirate Football Playback on The Sports Objective. Join us next Sunday night.
I'm a pirate down of my soul, and I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode, from the sidelines down to the post. Put it down like not even close, all out to the last whistle blow. For the flag with the soul and crossbones. Everybody stand up, get your hands up, let a team know that we got they back. This is our house, this is our town, our time, everyone not copy that. Everybody in the stands go bananas, scream loud, but don't hold back. Every foot, every yard, every first down, every touchdown with the cannons blast. Get it on, get it all, get the wave going like